Hello and welcome to the Wyoming Tribune Eagle Editorial Board's interviews with the candidates for Wyoming Governor who have challengers in the August 21st primary. I'm Brian Martin, the newspaper's managing editor, and we're here with Sam Galeotos, Republican candidate for governor. Thank you, Mr. Galeotos, for your candidacy and for agreeing to participate with us this morning.
Thank you for taking the time to see me.
We're joined in the room today by Rachel Martinez, Bob Fecht, and Jim Weaver, all community representatives on the Wyoming Tribune Eagle editorial board. And we're also joined by Katie Cull, a member of our reporting team, who will be monitoring the Facebook live feed, and she'll be curating questions from our online audience for questioning toward the end of our hour together this morning. Before we launch into questions, just a few reminders. Because these interviews are being live streamed, we have provided the editorial board's questions to the candidates in advance so that no one was at a disadvantage for interviewing early in the process. Also, we've asked the candidates to try to limit their answers to each question to 2 minutes in order to get to as many topics as possible and still have time for live questions at the end. And we won't be interrupting with any orchestra music or dragging you off the screen, but Rachel will be letting you know when we get to 2 minutes so you can wrap up your answer. Okay, Mr. Galeotos?
Great.
Finally, in addition to helping Wyoming voters decide who will get their vote later this summer, these interviews will be the basis of the editorial board's recommendations, and we will be recommending in both the Democratic and Republican primaries. We'll have separate editorials that are currently scheduled to be published in the newspaper in mid-July. That's it for now, so if you're ready, Mr. Galeotos, let's get started, shall we?
Let's roll.
All right, so please start out by giving us 2 minutes about yourself and your background.
Okay, well, I'm a Wyoming native. I was born and raised in Cheyenne. I'm a product of the Cheyenne public school system. My grandparents were immigrants to this country in the early 1900s. As they made their way in in Cheyenne, they opened their own small businesses. I was fortunate as a young child to be able to work in those businesses and see the product of their hard work along with my parents. I was always interested in making sure I could take care of myself, so I ventured into the community and did a variety of other things. I sold greeting cards door to door. I had a paper route. In fact, I used to have the Wyoming Tribune Eagle paper routes there in the morning and the afternoon, along with the Rocky Mountain News and the Denver Post. So always very interested in the entrepreneurial spirit. Worked at Frontier Days selling pop, that type of thing. Eventually, I left the state to go to school down at the University of Arizona, where I was educated in accounting and management information systems. I came back. We didn't have a lot of tech jobs, and that was the area I was interested in back in those days. And eventually launched into a 20-year career in the global travel technology industry, where I was blessed to lead people and organizations of all sizes in the business world. Since coming back, I've been largely involved in community service activities such as the Boys and Girls Club, the Downtown Development Authority, a variety of other community-related services. I love the state of Wyoming. I love its people, and I usually spend my time focused on initiatives that are helping our local community. I believe strongly in giving back to the community, and I believe that we're all obligated to do so.
Why do you want the governor's job?
Well, I think, straight to the point, I believe I can make a difference. And no matter what organization I've become involved with, whether it's the Boys and Girls Club or other community-related activities, I like to focus my time and energy where I feel I can make a difference. And when you look at our state, it has a lot of challenges right now. Chief among them, $1 billion deficit that is really putting pressure on everything in the state, our state agencies, the services we deliver, our school system, our education, and our local communities. Everybody is feeling the impact of this. And I've made, I've worked in the private sector my entire life, and I feel that my background and experiences are perfectly suited to taking on these challenges. I've served in a chief executive capacity several times, and I believe that our governor is the chief executive of our state and the one that should be responsible for really setting the vision and the course, collaborating with everybody to accomplish the mission and getting things done. So again, I believe I can make a difference, and that largely stems from my background and experience.
Mr. Mr. Galeotos, how do you differentiate yourself from your challengers?
Well, that's a great question, and I think there's a number of areas where I'm different. I've not been in politics before. I'm a businessman. I'm not an attorney, and I again, have a great deal of experience in running large enterprises. The state is a large, complex organization, and I have made a career out of leading people and organizations in the pursuit of solving large, complex problems and solving or taking advantage of large-scale opportunities. And again, I believe our governor is the chief executive of the state, and what differentiates me from everybody else is I have served as a chief executive in several capacities. I've been the CEO of WorldSpan Information Systems, Galileo International, CheapTickets.com. I've led small startup organizations all the way up to large multinational global companies that operate in 100 different countries with thousands of employees. So I believe I'm the only one in the race that has the true experience to guide a large organization, solve the problems. I've learned how to make difficult decisions and to get everybody on the same page going in the same direction. And right now, in anything, if you wanted to go run a large, complex company, you wouldn't go to somebody that's never had that experience before. You would go to somebody that knows how to do the job and knows how to get things done. And I believe that is what sets me apart from everybody else in this race. I've done that over and over again, and I've produced results.
What's your vision for the state of Wyoming?
Well, I largely feel that, number one, our vision needs to start with recognizing the fact that we need to change the course that we're on. Historically, the state has done very well with our energy industry and with our ag culture and with travel and tourism. But when you look at things right now, 70% of our revenues are coming from the energy industry. And so my vision is that we need to create an economy in Wyoming that diversifies our job base. And right now what we need to do is start living into the future a little bit and looking into the future. Where is the broader economy going? What kind of jobs are going to be created, and how is Wyoming going to be there and participate in that new economy? So we need to focus on where is the economy going, how are we going to compete in that economy, what types of jobs do we need to create, and more importantly, how are we going to create a state where our kids can stay here. Right now, my biggest concern for the state of Wyoming is that we continually have this attrition of our young people leaving the state, and there's two reasons for that. One is they want to have a job, number one, and many of them don't want to work in our foundational industries. And number two, they want to live somewhere that's vibrant and active and fun and social and that type of thing. So I really believe my focus is on how do we create the right economy in Wyoming that allows our kids to compete long term and allows our state to have a thriving economy and get rid of this boom and bust cycle that we've historically been associated with.
Good. If elected, what are your priorities for your first 100 days in office?
Well, first and foremost, my number one priority would be to set forth an initiative to get control of our state spending. There's plenty of evidence through legislative research and reports with these efficiency studies that have highlighted areas where our state can be more efficient and get rid of wasteful spending. So I first and foremost would walk into the office, take the work that's been paid for by the legislature and begin to put that into action. Number two, I would sit down with our legislative leaders and our legislators to make sure that we're crafting a budget that is rational and reasonable and is focused on the future for Wyoming and not so much on the past. Third, I would begin immediately to look at our energy industry and really, quite frankly, all businesses in the state, but specifically our energy industry, and focus both at the federal level and the state level to get rid of a lot of red tape that still exists. As I've traveled around the state and spoke to oil, gas, coal mining executives, they can highlight for you areas that are still cumbersome and burdensome to them producing more for them and for the state. Fourth, I would be focused on my leadership team. It's very clear to me with the experience I have running large businesses that one person doesn't do it all. One person may set the direction and the pace, but you need to have a good team. And so I would be looking to our agencies and making sure that I understand the strengths and weaknesses of the leaders we have today, but more importantly, just making sure that a good leadership team is put into place. Lastly, and not lastly, but probably more importantly, I would work with the legislature, the education community, the business community, all the elected officials on determining jointly where are we taking the state and how are we going to get there.
Mr. Galeotos, what do you plan to do with Governor Matt Mead's Endow initiative? Is it important to you? If so, why? And if not, why not?
Yeah, well, I'm a big believer in any type of aspirational thinking, and I think that that's the premise of Governor Mead's initiatives. I love aspirational thinking. I love thinking about the future, and I love problem solving for the future. And so the state and the people could expect a lot more of that from me. The one thing about Endow is they have created a number of initiatives in different areas, ranging from broadband to air service to ag. My emphasis and where I think I can be helpful and bring a great deal of expertise and experience to is that we need to make sure that every initiative that the Endow Committee has come up with really has financial rigor around it. There needs to be expectations of what type of investments are we creating or making to create an environment where the private sector can take hold of that and run with it. How long do we need to invest? What are the metrics of success? What are the metrics of failure? And so I think that I would add a lot of value with that initiative with Endow as far as making sure we have, frankly, to put it straight, great business cases. And that that there's an expectation that we're not going to be in it forever, and that at some point the private sector we're going to create the environment for the private sector to take the ball and run with it. So that's where I think I would be focused on with Endow. We have a lot of great minds that are involved with Endow. I think I would add a great deal of value to all of that for the benefit of the state.
Just a real quick follow-up. There's been some speculation or conversation that the group of people you've put together to be advisors to your campaign would be a replacement for Endow. That's not your intent. Is that just part of your campaign, or are you keeping the...
Yeah, that's part of my campaign. Look, I'm a person that if I'm going to tackle a job, I want to make sure that I'm well knowledgeable about all the relative issues, and I happen to believe that the private sector needs to grow in the state of Wyoming, and we need to empower the private sector. So several weeks ago, I put together a roundtable of advisors of key business executives from around the state who I am working with. In fact, I go from here to another call with them to really understand what it is we need to do to grow the private sector in the state of Wyoming. And these are people that have been successful and are of all industry types. And so I'm a person that likes to use talent. And we have some very talented people in this state, and I believe our business sector, our private sector, is where our growth needs to come from. And how can you achieve that growth unless you're listening to the people that have done it?
I just wanted to ask that because there's been some speculation that you were planning to use that group to replace Endow, so that's why I wanted to clarify that. All right, next question. Some experts believe that it's not possible to successfully diversify the state's economy without changing its tax structure. Do you agree with this? And if so, what changes would you propose?
Yeah, I'm a little bit troubled that I'm a business guy, and I'm a little bit troubled that we've run into turbulence, and then we immediately jump to hey, we need to raise taxes. I'm backwards in that. I feel that first and foremost we need to control our state spending, because as I've traveled the state and when I meet with people, the number one thing they say to me is, please assure us that you will take care of the state spending problem before you come to us and ask for more. That's very reasonable. I think that's a moral commitment that we need to make to the people of Wyoming. So state spending is the #1 thing that needs to be done, that we need to focus on, because if we can reduce $200, $300, $400, $500 million of spending, it changes the whole dialogue. There's another area that I think is very important, and that is we have $20 billion invested with, our state has $20 billion sitting in investment accounts. And again, if we can raise the rate of return, which I understand is very possible, in those investments, 1 percentage point on that amount of money is a significant benefit to the state. So my priority would be, first and foremost, to meet a commitment to our people that we are going to make sure that we're spending their money wisely, it's not being wasted, and this whole discussion on the tax thing, I think, is for another day.
How would you help guarantee stability and funding for local governments, cities, towns, and counties?
Well, from the day I announced that I was going to pursue running for governor, the one thing that I've communicated is, and I would tell the people, this is my belief system, is, and I've learned this through my professional career, is that growth never happens at the top of anything. Growth always happens at the local level. And I can't tell you how many times I've sat, whether I was sitting in my office in New York or Atlanta or Cheyenne, Wyoming, running a global company, and every time I thought that I knew more than the person in LA or Africa or in Japan or anywhere else, that I knew more than they did about how to grow their business or their local enterprise, I was always wrong. So I'm a firm believer that growth happens at the ground level, and right now our model in the state is opposite of that. We put our local communities in a position of having to basically be uncertain about the funding that they're going to receive from the state. And I believe, again, controlling state spending is a big issue here, because if we control money that's being consumed at the state level, it's going to leave more resources for the local level. If we get higher returns on our investment portfolio, that's going to leave more money to help our local level. And I firmly believe that local is where the economic combustion needs to come in this state. Economic growth is what we need, and the local communities are what's going to make that happen. So I am very focused on the fact that we need to figure out how to empower our local communities so that they can plan infrastructure, community improvements, and create viable communities, which are also very important to our young people.
Recent reports indicate fewer U.S. utilities are using coal for power generation due to the abundance of natural gas and renewables. So with this decline in coal's domestic use, Mr. Galeotos, do you support the continued investment in the coal industry and new technology?
Yes, coal is a very, very big part of the state of Wyoming, and I think it would be irresponsible to say that we're not interested in the coal industry or in investing in technology. So yes, I believe that the state is in its best interest to continue investing in coal. I believe that we've taken a leadership position with carbon capture and a lot of other technical initiatives that are underway to benefit coal. But I think it's a false premise, quite frankly, that somehow the coal industry is going away anytime in the near future. I happen to believe coal is going to be with us for a very long time. It's going to be integral to our nation's security and our power structure. And so Wyoming, as a leader in this, needs to make sure that we're doing all that we can to invest and to move coal, and to make sure that coal is a viable product long term, whether it's through providing electricity or carbon products, those types of things. So I think that we've gotten a little bit off kilter over the last 8 years or so with the fact that the coal needs to be destroyed. It's going to be with us a long time, and we need to understand that. And by not understanding it, we end up increasing the cost of electricity in this nation, which doesn't hurt people that are well off. It hurts people that can't afford to pay their electric bill. And so I'm a believer in coal, and it's going to be around for a long time. And I think we need to do things like the amicus brief that's been filed by our governor and our attorney general to make sure that the ports on the West Coast are opened up so that our coal, which Asia wants, that we're able from Wyoming to get it from Wyoming, Campbell County, over to Asia so that it can be used.
Where do you stand on regulating and taxing renewable energy production such as wind or solar?
So I think, like most people, I'm a supporter of all types of energy production. I don't think I know of many people who aren't, but I think it really gets down to is if we are serious about the development of solar and wind in the state of Wyoming, and we believe that that's a source of revenue for us and that it's a good product overall, then we need to make sure that our taxing policies and everything support that level of investment. So in other words, we don't want to say we want to do it and then we make it impossible for people to develop here or invest here in those industries. So I think, and that's really true of all industry, all renewable, the renewables, the traditional forms of energy, we need to always make sure that our tax policy and the environment we're creating for that investment is competitive with other places if we truly want to be in that business.
What are your thoughts on climate change, and as governor, what are your plans to address it in Wyoming?
So, I think first and foremost, I think it's true that climate changes. Okay, I think the real question is, what is man's contribution to that, and what's the impact that we're having? I happen to believe that we've done ourselves a disservice because climate change is really a scientific topic of which not all scientists agree with, the different premises of it, and it's turned into a political topic and is driven by the politics of it. And again, I would go back to that political discussion creates problems not for those in our country and in our state that can afford the prices to go up. We're impacting, when we let this become a political football, we're impacting those that can't afford their electrical bills and that type of thing. So I view it largely as a science issue and not a political issue. And I also believe that Wyoming in and of itself and our industries have really led the way in being responsible corporate citizens for the environment. Much of the technology that has benefited coal and its burning and those types of things have been here, and that we are good environmental stewards through our industry and through ourselves as a state. I would also go on to say that I would support the move that President Trump made when he pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord. I think that was not focused on the right issues and the right direction. It was making a political statement and not dealing with the truths of science itself.
Mr. Galeotos, as governor, how would you address education funding challenges in the state?
So again, since the first day I kind of got involved with this race, I've expressed my displeasure with the fact that all we ever talk about in education and argue about is the money. And in my mind, I look at, education is about learning, and learning takes place in one spot, and that's between a teacher and a student. And we all know that every student is different in some manner. And so learning takes place between a teacher and a student, and everything else outside of that interaction to me is really secondary to what learning is about. And education is about learning, okay? I look at it, we're the state of Wyoming, we're only 580,000 people. We have 93,000 kids in our K through 12 program, which is smaller than districts in other states. And we have fully demonstrated that we're willing to invest in education. So we should have the best education system. But again, I go to, what are we educating our kids for? And I believe the state needs to begin thinking about the future what are the skills and the jobs that are going to be necessary 5, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years down the line that Wyoming needs to be preparing our kids for? How do we create the education system that positions them for success? Lastly, I think our education system is one of the most important things we will have to driving a successful economy in the state of Wyoming. I do believe, like any organization or enterprise, that there are probably many efficiencies that can be had in our educational system. That's an area that I have a lot of experience in, and I would look forward to partnering with our education community to make sure that we're delivering high quality education that matters and keeps our kids successful in the future, but is also cost effective.
How big of a priority would it be for you to improve broadband internet access across the state? And if it's important, how would you as governor make it happen?
So I do believe high-speed broadband is a very important high priority for the state. If we're going to participate in the global economy or the national economy, we have to have high-speed broadband. I've identified what I believe are 6 prerequisites to growing the private sector in this state. The first one is we have to have a well-trained, skilled workforce. We need to have an education system that is preparing our kids to compete and to drive that workforce. Number 3, we need to be connected physically through air service in our state. Number 4, we need to be connected electronically through high-speed internet. Number 5, we need to have a healthcare system that works for Wyoming and its people. And number 6, we need to make sure that we're empowering our local economies, our local communities, to create the type of economic growth that we need for the state to be successful. So I view high-speed broadband in the same vein as those other 5 items. Those to me are prerequisites for empowering and growing the private sector in this state. And the only way that this state is going to be successful in the future is if we have a thriving private sector. And so I look to initiatives that are taking place now through Endow and otherwise. I believe that technology will continue to evolve so that we'll be able to get broadband around to the rest of the communities, but it has to be a priority for the state.
How would you address challenges related to providing health care to all Wyoming residents? You said it's one of your top 6 priorities.
It is.
How would you make that happen?
So I think there's 2 things in healthcare that we need to look at. We have the insurance side and we have the service delivery side. And I think on the insurance side, we need to look at things like working with other states for block grant funding of Medicaid. I think we need to look at programs that allow us to have insurance across state lines. I think that we need to make sure that we're allowing different associations and groups to pool together to get insurance collectively, and get better price points. On the service delivery side, I really view healthcare as a leapfrog moment for Wyoming. I look at it and it's very clear to me, nobody in Washington is going to solve healthcare delivery for the state of Wyoming. And we need to take that into our own hands, but I think it's a huge opportunity. And here's why. First and foremost, many times we look at Wyoming and we say that we're rural and we have a low population, and we kind of inside ourselves view that as a challenge. I think those 2 elements are opportunities for Wyoming right now. And here's why. We see on the forefront telemedicine, telediagnostic services, telestroke diagnostics. All of these things are ready to come into the marketplace, and they are all geared to benefit rural communities. Wyoming is the perfect laboratory for us to take the lead in innovating those products and those services, doing it right here with our own people, creating that innovation, and at the same time creating jobs for our kids, and then let it go from here. But we need to lead the nation because we have the perfect laboratory for innovation in healthcare. And I could basically make that case for a lot of other industries. But I think specifically in healthcare, we need to be setting the pace with healthcare, with innovation in that area.
Switching gears, if a marijuana legalization bill passed the Wyoming legislature and came to your desk, would you sign it? Why or why not?
Well, I guess the devil would be in the details on that. I'm not for right now for recreational approval of marijuana. I am supportive of medicinal marijuana through obviously the parameters from prescription from a qualified doctor, those types of things. So on the recreational side, no, but on the medicinal side, I do support that.
And do you believe chronically ill patients should be allowed to use CBD, other cannabis?
I absolutely
well?
do. Yes.
All of that would be.
I do.
Okay. What do you think of the current way liquor sales are handled in Wyoming, and if you think it needs to change, how so?
Well, this is an area I have a little bit of knowledge in. I believe that the legislature and our Wyoming Liquor Dealer Association last year made some pretty important changes and really brought the liquor laws in Wyoming up to current date by, they made some changes in dispensing room, parameters, those kinds of things. So I think there were a lot of great changes that were made last year in the legislature. Those have all gone into effect. I believe that there's probably more work that needs to be done in the availability of licenses for local taverns and restaurants, and I think even within those licenses, some of the parameters might be a little bit too strict for today's commerce. There's a lot of creative things taking place in entertainment venues, music venues, restaurants, those types of things. So I think it's important for our legislature and the Liquor Dealers Association to take a look at how we can broaden availability and how we can create more flexibility in the licensing that we have today. And those are the areas that I think, I've been involved with the Downtown Development Authority here in Cheyenne. I happen to believe that when you look at some of our core downtown areas, music venues, dining establishments, entertainment venues are all going to be very important to building those communities back up, and we need to make sure our liquor laws coincide with our objectives in that regard.
You alluded to it earlier, Mr. Galeotos, but how important is providing commercial air service to Wyoming communities, and if it's important, how would you as governor make it happen?
Well, again, it's one of my prerequisites of growing in the private sector in the state of Wyoming. We need to have air service, and I'm satisfied right now. Our department, DOT, Department of Transportation, is working with a number of local communities around the state right now. I'm interested to see what type of process and program develops out of that. Again, we need to caution that whatever the plan is we have for enhancing service throughout the state, that there's a strict business case that goes with it, and it doesn't become something that it's a government-run entity or that we're subsidizing it forever. We need to, again, lay out the parameters of what is it we need to invest, how long do we need to do that for, when will the private sector be able to lift off, no pun intended, and take off, and really have that become a private sector thing. Our big challenge, I worked in the airline industry. I worked for Delta Airlines, and I remember back in the late 80s, the gentleman that oversaw the airport here, I tried to help him with Delta get reliable air service here. And the one thing that everybody needs to recognize is that the airlines are in the business to make a profit, and they're not going to be concerned whether Wyoming has air service or not. And so it's something that we need to solve, but at some point we should have the number of enplanements that justify that taking on its own life, and the private sector takes it on. We need to create a great environment for it to get going.
What's your position on gun control measures to protect citizens in public venues? Do you believe locations like the University of Wyoming and events like Cheyenne Frontier Days have the right to impose rules that limit a citizen's right to carry a loaded firearm?
Well, I know that this is a very debated topic right now. I need to tell everybody first and foremost, I'm a strong defender of the Second Amendment. I believe it states what it states. I don't believe there's any slicing or dicing of its meaning. Citizens have the right to bear arms. I believe that that gives them the right in any public venue to exercise their right. So if it's a public place, it's a public place that's owned by the citizens of the state of Wyoming, then citizens have the right to carry. I do also believe in private property rights, and therefore on private property, I believe the property owner has the right to set the rules on their property. So we could go on, but I think that's pretty clear cut.
What's your position on the transfer of federal lands to the state and the management of those lands?
Well, growing up in Wyoming, I have learned to really value our public lands and the access that they provide and the recreation that they provide to us. I know that there's a lot of discussion about we have the right to go seize the public lands, and from all the different, I'm not an attorney, but from all the different people I've talked to, I don't know that we would be successful in that. And secondly, I'm not a believer in a big transfer of the federal lands to the state. I believe that they're there for a purpose for our citizens right now. I would not be behind any big push to transfer ownership of them to the state. But I do feel that, as I stated earlier, I'm a big believer that when things are managed locally, when resources are managed locally, they're probably more responsive to the people. And so I would be open to working with the Trump administration or any administration in Washington to research ways that perhaps the state can have a bigger say in management of the lands. Those would always have to be in a strict multi-use model where development and agriculture and outdoor recreation all have their rights involved. So I can see the benefits of being involved in the management of the lands, but the people should know I'm not going to go into office and go to seek transferring all public land, all federal lands to the state of Wyoming.
Mr. Galeotos, if elected, how do you plan to work with and communicate with the press, with the legislature, and with Wyoming citizens?
Well, I think I kind of laid it out earlier. I'm a big person that you need to have all parties at the table when you're doing things, and so when I would enter office, I'd actually start prior to entering office. I would be outreaching to all of the business community, the legislative community, the other state elected officials, our education community, and our state employees, and really making sure that we're creating a vision collectively on where we want to take the state. I'm a big believer that you need to create that vision, you need to communicate that vision, and you need to get feedback. Feedback is the most important thing you can have as a leader. You have to constantly be in search of feedback. And so my approach would be very aggressive, upfront, and open on what we're devising as a vision, where we want to take the state. It would be collaborative. I mentioned earlier I've led a business that operated in 100 different countries with 100 different agendas, 100 different priorities, 100 different viewpoints. And what you learn is how to get everybody, understand everybody's concerns and their priorities and mold that into a common vision that everybody can buy into. So that's how I would approach it. And I believe that the press should be there every step of the way, because I would be using the press as a key component to communicating to the citizens of Wyoming what our goals, what our objectives are, where we stand, and how we're doing.
What other topics or issues would you like to address that we haven't covered so far today?
I would just reinforce, going back to the question on what differentiates me from the other candidates. I'm a businessman. I've had a great deal of experience in leadership, not only of small companies, but large enterprises, global enterprises. I've worked in the private sector my entire life. I know how to solve large, complex problems. I know how to lead. I'm a seasoned executive, and I believe that that's what the state needs right now. And what we need to do is make sure that we are limiting the role of government. And as I said earlier, we need to essentially get government out of the way, and we need to grow the private sector in the state of Wyoming. I'm a small businessman here in Cheyenne. I start businesses, I run businesses, I manage businesses. I also happen to be the chairman of Greenhouse Data Corporation, which is one of Wyoming's premier technology companies. I think I've demonstrated the fact that I'm already diversifying, working to diversify the state. And I think through my community service, I've demonstrated that I care about the people of Wyoming, our local communities, and that's what people will get from Sam Galeotos.
We're going to shift to the Facebook Live audience, and Katie's going to let us know what questions we have from them.
Great. Thanks, folks, for tuning in. We appreciate you all watching and taking the time to be informed voters. We have a question here. I'm just going to start from the top. This one comes from Melinda Ann, and she would like to know if you have a platform on elder abuse and what you might do to cut down on that.
Melinda Ann, I don't have a specific platform on it, but I'm a believer that we need to take care of all of our brethren, and whether they're old or young. And as I've traveled the state, I've seen a lot of concern around elderly care, facilities for elderly care, and that needs to be an area that I, as governor, make sure that I focus on, and that we're taking care of people from all ages to the senior. And there are probably certain rights and responsibilities that we need to make sure are clear, but I think elder care facilities are important in this state. It's only going to become more important as people like myself get older. But one thing that I think we need to do in elder care is, and this goes back to my healthcare discussion, is we need to find ways to take care of people well in their own homes. That's something that would be a priority for me, because we have the ability to do that now, and I think technology will allow us to focus on that more. But I think there needs to be a priority on how, especially in our rural state, how do we allow people to stay at home with their families for longer periods of time?
Great. And the next question comes from Paul Evans, and he's wondering, I'm just going to read here, he said he'd like to know your position on the complete lack of professionalism and decorum with many politicians today, and whether representatives have a responsibility to be models of the best human behaviors.
Well, we're human beings and everybody operates differently. I can only speak for myself. I believe that everybody should be, no matter who they are, what they do, how they live their life, should be treated with respect, dignity. We should love everybody, and we should get out of the game of being judgmental, because I believe judgment is reserved for one person, and that's the Lord above. And it's not up to us to judge people. And that's how I feel about that.
Great. And another question comes from Jim Clark, and he would like to know about your stance on term limits for state legislators.
Well, I think that's already been adjudicated, and we've gone around that before. I personally like to see turnover in public service. I think turnover is very, very important. And we need to do all that we can to promote that. I don't know that the Supreme Court, the courts have made that decision. So I think it's one of those things where now we as voters need to do our responsibility, and we need to get out and vote, and we need to make sure that the people representing us are the proper people. And I too probably share his concerns that sometimes public service turns into a career, and that's not my belief. I think we get in to serve, other people need to serve, and the more people that serve, the better communities that we're going to have.
Great. And please feel free to continue to comment with your questions. Do we have any questions from the editorial board?
Follow-ups, folks?
Yes, I have one. You mentioned that $20 billion of state assets that could be improved upon in their investment. Could you give us some specifics as to what you think should be happening and that's not?
Well, first and foremost, we have a variety of different types of investments, and some of them are intergenerational funds, and with certain types of investments we have certain parameters of what can be invested and what can't be invested. I think even in those that are kind of stipulated at a lower yield, that there's opportunities to manage them better. There are other ones that are far more open, and the investment prerogatives are higher, and you can invest in equities and those types of things. And I think through our own state treasurer's office, they have identified that the peer groups that we compare to are probably not comparative, and that we need to change who we're comparing ourselves to, and that there is uplift in a number of those areas where we have the flexibility to do it. I think there's an issue with getting the systems in place to do that and the relationships in place to do that. But by all accounts, when you look at, and I can't cite each one specifically now, but if you go to the state, you can find where our rate of returns in certain investments are below what's happening in other states. And we need to review that. And as governor, you are chairman of the State Land and Investment Board. And so I would be very interested in working with our treasurer's office to identify where it is we can get higher returns and what is it that's preventing us from getting those higher returns. There's some legitimate reasons, there's some system issues. We need to solve those, because if we get a higher return next year, that compounds itself in the following year and in the following year, and that's some pretty significant money.
Thank you.
Other follow-ups?
Yeah. So as you know, we're having a huge debate about immigration, and although in Wyoming we might think we're isolated from that, we have an immigration detention center that is looking at coming into county, and there's some divisions on that. Where do you stand on that as governor?
Well, first and foremost, I would say that we are a land of laws, and I think that we need to enforce our immigration laws. I've been a little dismayed that we haven't been doing that. In regards to the detention center that's proposed over in Uinta County outside of Evanston, that's a local decision in my mind. That local community needs to decide if that's something they want there. And again, that goes back to my whole premise. I believe local decisions are the basis of how this state's going to be successful, and I would yield to the local community to make that decision. I know that they're going through a great deal of due diligence on it. I know that people of all different persuasions are telling the local leaders what their thoughts are on both sides of that, but that's a decision for them to make, not for me to make.
Thank you.
One common question that we have had in these various live streams, but we have not gotten today, is, you've mentioned this a couple times, how do we bring and keep young people here? You've alluded to sort of some of your solutions, but what specifically as governor would you do to make sure that young people stay here?
So first and foremost, I think we need to keep young people here. Okay, it's great to bring them also, but we need to keep young people here. And right now, for example, last year I believe we graduated about 5,500 seniors out of our state high schools. I don't know what the exact number is. I've seen one study that would indicate that 60% of those end up departing the state. Okay, and in order for our economy and for the state to be successful long term, we need to have a workforce. And so my thoughts are, again, I go back to what I said earlier, we need to be looking into the future on where the economy is going, how technology is changing the economy. Some of the most important jobs that are going to be out there in 10 years, we don't even know what they are. I look back and I have an 11-year-old, and if you look at any 11 or 12-year-old or somebody that's of lesser age, none of them have ever known a world without touchscreens. Okay? So we need to recognize that, and that's only becoming more prevalent. So we need to define the economy of the future for Wyoming, and we need to map back to our education system so that these 5,500 kids coming out and graduating can find employment and build their families right here in Wyoming. It's unacceptable to me that our kids are having to leave. They leave for two reasons. One, primarily, they want a job. They need to earn money and they need to be successful in their careers. And that's why we need to diversify the job base in the state, because not everybody wants to work in the energy sector or the ag community, or for that matter, travel and tourism. So we need to diversify our job base, and the only way we're going to do that is if we have some sort of understanding of where the economy is going and what type of jobs are going to be created, and that we're mapping back and making sure our kids are prepared to take those jobs and that they can have, you know, viable salaries and everything else. The second part of that is kids today are a little bit different than when I grew up here in Cheyenne. Okay, they want a different kind of community. They want, you know, vibrant downtowns. They want that social community space. And so we need to make sure that they can have a job and make a living here in Wyoming. But we also need to make sure we're focused on creating viable, energetic communities that our young kids, what's attractive to them. I have great experience in this. The businesses that we've started here just in the last year, we're having difficulty finding young people to take those jobs, right? On the tech side, we have jobs, you don't need a 4-year degree. Sometimes we just need a certificate at Greenhouse Data. And many people don't even have those skills. So we need to be looking at what kind of jobs are being created, what are the skills that are necessary, and we need to make sure whether it's in the trades, welding, or if it's a computer engineer or technician, that kids are coming out of high school prepared to take whatever job they seek and is available.
As a follow-up, what role does higher education play in that then? Is it, you know, promoting more tech training at LCCC, or, I mean, what does that look like?
I think there's a great opportunity in this state right now for the private sector, the business community, to partner with higher education for those jobs and make sure that kids, that we have the programs. A great example of that is our travel and tourism industry has worked with the University of Wyoming to create an outdoor rec and hospitality management program, which is sorely needed in this state. We need to be doing more of that. But I would say not just in higher education. Business needs to be partnering with our local high schools and beginning to have programs in place that allow kids to identify where their interests are, serve in internships, and come out of high school already knowing the direction they want to take, and for that matter, already starting to be prepared for that direction. So that's where I think our education system is absolutely critical to the long-term success of the state. I think we have great education, but times are changing and we need to make sure that we're changing just as quickly.
Any other questions?
Nope.
No, that's great. Well, I want to thank the Facebook Live audience, and I want to thank you, Mr. Galeotos, for joining us today.
Right, I'd like to thank everybody, and I'd like to remind everybody to please consider Sam Galeotos and vote for Sam Galeotos in the primary in August.
Great. And that primary is Tuesday, August 21st. Absentee
Great.
voting starts a week from today on July 6th. We do have more information about candidates at our website, wyomingnews.com, including your candidate announcement story and those of others. This video will be archived on our website as well afterwards. So thanks again, Mr. Galeotos, for being here.
Thank you, everybody.